Okay, let me raise myself up here. It's a little warm in this room. Hopefully warm weather is coming back to San Diego after all this rain. We're at K55, and we're looking at age dating, which appears over and over again to testify to a young Earth. Certainly, the age dating methods, radiometric especially, are not reliable, and we've seen that. Now we're looking at the potassium-argon age dating method, which the evolutionists seem to focus on for a short period of time. We're going to conclude, after looking at the argon 40, the excess argon 40 is ubiquitous in volcanic rocks. The excess AR40 was inherited from the mantle sources of the magmas. So it will completely skew any measurement that would be accurate as to the passing of time, because you start with a certain amount of argon and you see that it has been produced by potassium radioactive brand, and so much argon 40 would show you how long it took to get there, that gas, from the potassium, and that's the half-life of potassium radioactive potassium. But the problem is the argon 40, the original argon 40, comes from the mantle sources underneath the surface of the Earth, and so it won't give you a true result. And you say this is not only true for recent and young volcanoes, but for ancient ones as well. The Grand Canyon, those measurements of time passing are not accurate. So in conclusion, the fact that all primordial argon has not been released yet from the Earth's deep interior is consistent with a young Earth. Also, when samples of volcanic rocks are analyzed from potassium-argon and argon-argon dating for the purpose of getting the age, the investigators can never really be sure, therefore, that whatever argon is in the rocks is from the situ radioactive decay of potassium-40, since their formation, or whether some or all of it, came from the mantle with the magmas. It came from some other process. You can't combine the two. This could even be the case when the potassium-argon, argon-argon analyses yield dates compatible with other radioisotopic dating systems and or with fossil dating based on evolutionary assumptions. You put the three together, all of them are questionable, so you don't have much more than a questionable result. Furthermore, there would be no way of knowing, because the argon 40 from radioactive decay of potassium 40 cannot be distinguished analytically from primordial argon 40 that's trapped in the mantle, not from radioactive decay, except, of course, by external assumptions about the ages of the rocks. So you're trying to figure out, well, let's verify how old the rocks are, and you don't use a verifiable, reliable method like potassium-argon dating isn't, and to say, well, okay, this agrees with what we think the rocks are over here, but over there we'll ignore those ones that don't agree. It's a belief system, not scientific. Thus, all potassium-argon and argon-argon dates of volcanic rocks are questionable, as well as fossil dates calibrated by them. Use a bad method here, add another bad method there. Now, I'm not a scientist, obviously. Here are the references by scientists who wrote these articles. Please look at them. I didn't write them. These are the footnotes. You can look at them. Look these up just like I did in this article. MA, millions of years. GA, billions of years. by this potassium-argon method. When you go that much time pass by and you have a 1% defect in your basic experimental measurement, you go through 1 billion years, you're going to have a long differences in time, possible errors, plus or minus hundreds of millions of years. Dr. Andrew Snelling in this footnote says, according to the assumptions foundational to potassium-argon and argon-argon dating of rocks, there should not be any daughter radiogenic argon in rocks when they form. When measured, all argon-40 in a rock is assumed to have been produced in situ by radioactive decay of K40 within the rock since it formed. However, it is well established that volcanic rocks contain excess argon-40, that is, argon-40 which cannot be attributed to either atmospheric contamination or in situ radioactive decay of potassium-40. It skews the results massively. This argon-40 represents primordial argon carried from source areas in the Earth's mantle by the parent magmas and is inherited by the resultant volcanic rocks and thus has no age significance. But you wouldn't know that when you're measuring the age of the rock. You just assume that it all came from the radiomatic disintegration of potassium argon-40 to a more stable potassium. However, are all of the rocks in the Earth's crust, are they also susceptible to contamination by excess argon-40 emanating from the mantle? If so, then this dating system would be similarly questionable. And it goes on and on and on about the questionality of this. You can go on and on and on and on. This system is not trustworthy. More references by scientists for this article. You can read this at your leisure. All these articles. Scientists. Now we go to the radiocarbon dating method. A lot of people talk about it. How reliable, how great an indicator it is of when mankind came to the Earth so many millions of years ago. Dr. Snelling, a scientist, says this tool of radiocarbon dating has become quite widely used and falsely accepted in recent years and is important to our study since it professes falsely to supply absolute dates for events within the past 30 or 40,000 years. This, of course, covers the apparent periods of biblical history as well as more recent dates, and so bears directly upon the question of the flood and other related events. If you can dispel the reliability of the flood to show what it shows and support the evolutionary point of view, you have a big upgrade on the evolutionary point of view now, because the flood seems to have favored the creative side, the recent Earth side, rather than the blind, random access, millions of years of time for random things to get together and form more complex things. Anyway, the formation of radiocarbon, that is carbon-14, the radioactive isotope of ordinate carbon from cosmic radiation, was first discovered by Sergei Korolev, an authority on cosmic rays. Describing the carbon-14 dating method, which has resulted, Korolev says, cosmic ray neutrons produced as secondary particles in the atmosphere by the original radiation are captured by nitrogen nuclei to form the radioactive isotope of carbon, the isotope of mass 14, carbon-14. This isotope has a long half-life, something over 5,500 years. By the application of some very well thought out techniques, Libby and his colleagues have actually not only identified the radiocarbon in nature, but have also made quantitative estimates thereof. Since this carbon in the atmosphere mostly becomes attached to oxygen to form carbon dioxide, and since the carbon dioxide is ingested by plants and animals and is incorporated in their biological structures, and further, it gets interesting, this process stops at the time of death of the specimen, when the specimen ceases to ingest any further carbon dioxide. So this might be a good scientific measurement tool. The percentage of radiocarbon among the normal carbon atoms in its system can then supposedly be used to establish the date at which the specimen stops metabolizing at his death. So, scientist Sergei I. Korf, The Origin and Implications of the Cosmic Radiation, American scientists, see, I'm quoting scientists here. It is presumed that today's rate of absorption of carbon-14 into the atmosphere by cosmic radiation has remained constant throughout the presumed millions of years of the Earth's existence. So a plant, when it was alive, would reflect the proportion of carbon-14 to normative carbon at the particular time of its existence. Later times to have an ever-increasing proportion of carbon-14 as reflected in the dead organic matter of those times. Recall, though, we have discovered over the years that carbon-14 can't go back beyond tens of thousands of years. So, carbon-14, presumed millions of years of Earth's existence, they're not compatible. It only goes back tens of thousands of years. Therefore, the higher the percentage of carbon-14 to normal carbon in the fossil remains will indicate a younger age in which that living matter once lived, according to evolutionists and uniformitarianists. Let's go into details. As always, there seem to be false assumptions or assumptions made, of which in this case there are false assumptions made in the carbon dating method. There is no doubt that this carbon dating method constitutes a very ingenious and powerful dating tool, he says, provided only that the inherent assumptions are valid. Culp lists the assumptions as follows. There are two basic assumptions in the carbon-14 method. One is that the carbon-14 concentration in the carbon dioxide cycle is constant. The other is that the cosmic ray flux has been essentially constant, at least on a scale of centuries. He goes on to say, to which we might add the assumption of the constancy of the rate of decay of the carbon-14 atoms, the assumption that dead organic matter is not later altered with respect to its carbon content by any biologic or other activity, the assumption that the carbon dioxide content of the ocean and atmosphere has been constant with time, and the assumption that the huge reservoir of oceanic carbon has not changed in size during the period of applicability of the method, and the assumption that the rate of formation and the rate of decay of radiocarbon atoms have been in equilibrium throughout the period of applicability, the time when they decided which has been proven false, by the way, they decided to do the experiment on a particular specimen. Every one of these assumptions is highly questionable in the context of the events of creation and the deluge. It is falsely maintained by evolutionists that the method has been verified beyond any question by numerous correlations with known dates. Here an observation by Libby himself is interesting and in point. The first shock Dr. Arnold and I had was that our advisors informed us that history of mankind's civilizations extended back only 5,000 years. We had thought initially that we would be able to get samples all along the curve back to 30.